Good afternoon, and welcome to today's ICIT webinar, The Silent Crisis, Combating Organized Crime, Combating Organized Cyber Fraud, Targeting America's Older Adults. I'm Val Moon with the Institute for the Critical Infrastructure Technology, or ICIT. ICIT's mission is to modernize, secure, and make resilient critical infrastructure that provides for people's foundational needs. By applying a people-centric lens to critical infrastructure research and decision-making, our work ensures that modernization and security investments have a lasting positive impact on society. Today's conversation addresses a growing crisis that sits at the intersection of cybercrime, financial security, public trust, and human impact: the exponential rise of organized transnational fraud targeting older Americans. This is not petty crime. It is industrial-scale fraud driven by organized criminal enterprises exploiting technology, social engineering, and jurisdictional seams, leaving victims financially devastated and law enforcement overwhelmed. Here are some of the particulars to this challenge. Reported elder fraud losses continue to rise at alarming rates, with estimates reaching tens of billions of dollars annually, and that's widely understood to be only a fraction of actual losses. Local and federal law enforcement agencies are drowning in fraud reports, often without the resources or consolidated intelligence needed to pursue the most destructive networks. And when older adults are targeted, the harm isn't just financial, it's emotional, physical, and often life-altering. So the question isn't that the problem isn't serious. The question is, how do we respond at scale? To explore that question, we're joined by Brady Finta, CEO and founder of the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center, or NEFCC. Brady brings decades of frontline experience from the U.S. Marine Corps to the FBI to leading some of the most complex investigations into transnational organized crime. He also founded the San Diego Elder Justice Task Force and continues to lead the fight against elder fraud nationally through the NEFCC. Brady, thank you so much for joining ICIT today for this discussion. So
Thanks for me.
Yes, and from your law enforcement perspective, how has elder fraud evolved over the last decade, from isolated scams to organized transnational criminal activity that we're seeing today?
Yeah, honestly, I think this is one of the most important questions that we should be asking, because it's not really clear out there to a lot of people, including our nation's leaders sometimes, the actual scope of this problem and how much it has evolved. I think the FTC actually has their numbers closest to being the truth in terms of when they extrapolate the losses each year. In 2023, they estimated the loss to be about 61 billion just to older Americans, and in 2024 about 81 billion. I think it's worth actually pondering that number for a moment. Also, the level of sophistication of these frauds has grown just astronomically over the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, I think it's enough to say they integrate AI into all of their processes now. They can create high quality frauds, tougher to spot, harder to investigate. They can share targeted lists of specific demographics and populations like our older Americans. And they also reinvest in their enterprises. They're building giant fraud compounds that look like portions of Wall Street with training. They have HR departments. They are reinvesting in their entities that are focused exclusively on stealing from Americans. I think it's actually worth considering this as a national security issue when you talk about 80 plus billion, maybe collectively about 190 billion with all of the fraud leaving the United States and going to transnational organized crime, sometimes in countries that are adversarial to the United States.
Actually, that is a staggering stat. When you think about overall fraud, that means that the elderly population, which is a very vulnerable population, as we all know, that it's actually just shameful to think that that's the majority of what the fraud investigations when it comes to cyber-related crimes are the people that they're targeting. But why is it that they are targeting these? There must be a reason, right, that these criminal enterprises are targeting the older population. And, so what are some of those reasons, and what's the impact of these crimes, especially when you compare them to other cyber fraud cases?
Yeah, unfortunately, they're not dumb. They go where the money is. I think, when we talk statistics, statistically, older adults numerically are not more victimized than actually a demographic of about 18 to 25. And unfortunately, they lose a lot more money per capita than younger adults. So they're not necessarily targeted in terms of, numerically the number of victims, but they do lose a lot more money. There's also, a trend in these criminal enterprises also to cultivate essentially target lists of people who are either predisposed towards being, victims or who were victims before. A lot of those tend to be our older victims, where they're targeted over and over and over again by different fraud scams because that victim list has been transferred or sold or propagated. I think there's a general feeling that there's potentially cognitive decline involved here. And honestly, I've had a lot of instruction from different folks. One of which a PhD researcher up at USC named Dr. Dukan, who has done a ton of research on this, to say that cognitive decline is not necessarily a key component of this. And while cognitive, capability might stay incredibly high, sometimes decision making drops off later in life based on a whole bunch of other factors. And I think this is one of those key elements that would insinuate that there is some decision making decline based on financial loss. I think one of the biggest things we also have to talk about is these folks, they're our parents. Yeah. Right? There are grandparents. They've saved their entire lives. They've done all the right things. They don't deserve this. We can't be blaming victims for, falling for it, or these are victims just like someone's a victim of a robbery. These folks are victims, and they cannot recover this money. A lot of them are, past their earning stage. They're on Social Security. It devastates them financially and even results in significant health problems, high rates of suicide, and devastating isolation because of the shame involved. So it's much more than a financial crime.
Wow. And, I know with law enforcement, I know in my time at the FBI and, the latter half of my career, I worked a lot with cyber issues, and cyber crimes in general were underreported and also under investigated, right? For a variety of reasons. Law enforcement didn't have the expertise. They just, it was really sad to see, when you compare it to other physical crimes that happen and are committed. So, we're talking about fraud here, and I think that there's probably some similar constraints when we talk about these elder fraud cases. So what are some of these constraints, the jurisdictional limits, the competing priorities and resource shortages? Like, what is it looking like right now on the ground?
I mean, honestly, I think first and foremost, we should talk about volume, right? If there's more than 1 million victims a year and 81 billion in loss in every jurisdiction of America, there's none really that are much more than others. How do you investigate that? I mean, you don't have tens of thousands of fraud investigators in the government, to do this. You have hundreds, thereabouts. So volume is huge. Resources are gigantic. And, there is this kind of prevalent feeling, I think, particularly among our state and local law enforcement agencies. Hey, there's nothing we can do, right? Like if you're walking down the street and somebody runs up and clubs you over the head and takes your purse and runs away with $600, they're going to try as hard as they can to find that person, right? You walk into a police department, you say, hey, my mom lost $80,000 in a scam related to a pop-up ad and a 1-800 number where there was Bitcoin involved and an overseas transfer. Hey, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do, is generally the answer. There's always something we can do, particularly when we work collectively. But right now, and I hate to say it, but this is too big a problem for United States law enforcement. It's too big a problem for the United States government. I think this has gotten to the point, like a lot of problems have in our history as a country, where this is a whole of society problem, right? The war on drugs touches every American. Terrorism touches every American. Things like crimes against children touch every American. As far as, we need to bond together to do something about this. And I think we've reached that point now with this. And just as a really quick, kind of analogy, our recoveries in this country, of fraud losses and scam losses compared to the actual losses. So just taking last year as an example, there was about 81 billion in loss. I believe that is actually pretty accurate. And from what I've seen, it's pretty hard to get this number, probably about 600 million in recoveries of scams and fraud. And if you think about that in seconds, 81 billion seconds is 2,567 years, right? Before Jesus. 600 million is about 19 years. That's not even before Facebook, right? So it is a giant chasm right now between what goes out and what we're able to stop.
That's that is pretty staggering. I mean, 1 million victims is just, it's kind of hard to comprehend. So, I mean, I'm assuming that there is probably an awareness amongst these transnational organizations too, that there is a lack of, I don't know if it's appetite's the right word, or resources or motivation to investigate these crimes. So I'm assuming that where you could probably find some commonalities between some victims around the country, that some of those things are not being identified because there's just not the resources or manpower or will to put against these things. So is that the case? And these networks, criminal enterprises, taking advantage of some of that?
Of course, that lack of ability to have consistent enforcement across the country and all levels of law enforcement, it matriculates all the way down to the cases, which they have for some reason an endless number of people willing to raise their hand and participate in these frauds. A lot of these are youngsters that basically offer things like money laundering, transportation, recruitment, things like that. And I've been in plenty of these interviews where you're trying to convince them that they're in some real trouble here, right? They just caught for fraud, and they look at you kind of like you got a third eye in your head, and they're like I'm going to go to jail. They don't believe that enforcement is a real thing in these cases. And let's face it, again, you club somebody over the head and steal $600, you're going to prison for aggravated assault and robbery. You get convicted of fraud, you may or may not spend a day in jail. It just depends. We need to change our thinking in general. I think the lack of reporting is massive because that's how law enforcement builds cases. They have pools of victims, they aggregate crimes, and when you don't have that, when you don't have the vast majority of the people, probably 90% or over, not reporting the crime, not only do the investigations get more difficult, enforcement is tougher, convictions are tougher, it makes the whole thing more tougher to pull off.
It seems a little overwhelming, but I think you created NEFCC to help with that, right? To help solve some of those issues. So what is the mission of NEFCC, and what problem were you trying to solve by creating it?
Yeah, I don't want to be Debbie Downer. Like, I do believe there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think as a country, we can do this, right? After 9/11, we created JTTFs in a snap all around the country. In the 90s, we created ICACs, Internet Crimes Against Children, and anti-drug task forces in every major city in America. We can do this as a country, but I do think that it absolutely has to include the private sector, right? The private sector has the data. They have really robust and mature, highly capable fraud programs in all these major companies. And when the United States government or law enforcement gets into an investigation, they need those companies to participate. Unfortunately, it's usually at the end of a subpoena, after a long wait, after kind of pulling some teeth. You know, there's a lot of difficulties there that prevent kind of the rapid and efficient execution of these cases. So that's what NEFCC is trying to do. We're trying to take the fraud programs that already exist in these companies. They're already funded. Like I said, they're already mature and they know their systems better than anyone. And they want those bad guys to be caught. They want to share that data. There's some impediments to that. It makes it somewhat difficult, but as a nonprofit, I can take those, you know, portions of those investigations, the data that belongs to bad guys, and stack it up, right? We can aggregate it, we can analyze it, and we can present it in such a way to law enforcement to save them an inordinate amount of time in those investigations, and also to really focus and prioritize some of these cases. You know, there's millions of victims. It's not millions of bad guys, right? Some of these criminal organizations, they'll victimize thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people. So that's where we need to get to the heart of is, where are the bad guys? Where are their centers of gravity? How do we get to it? And I think the fastest, most efficient way is a public-private partnership.
And so it seems like, because that's the mission of NEFCC, it was important, or actually critical, right, to have private sector as partners with the starting up of your foundation. So has that been easy? Have they?
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
To help, because I mean, I agree with you that, you know, a lot of these, I mean, they're multinational companies, right, that are here in the US, and they do have incredible fraud programs, and a lot of our former colleagues are experts in a lot of those programs. But, you know, I could see the value in a place like NEFCC connecting those dots, you know, where you know, rather than just having one big corporation look at just what's impacting their company, but then connecting that across. Because just like with nation state actors that we've seen on the cyber side, targeting various critical infrastructure nodes within the US, and seeing that it could be a similar actor doing that across different parts of the country. I'm sure that you are seeing that. So I mean, I would assume that some of the work that you guys are doing are kind of is maybe building some more to those companies to see that, you know, if you can connect these dots, it's an even more powerful case against some of these networks.
100%. And it's not, you know, it's not rocket surgery. Like these, you know, I worked my entire law enforcement career on task forces, right? Because we did figure out over time that with a really big problem, it takes a really big, diverse group to work the problem. But every one of those task forces was predominantly different law enforcement agencies. And, you know, now I tell, you know, especially guys that are folks that still work on these task forces, just imagine that in your task force, it wasn't just, you know, the FBI and the DEA and the Sheriff's Department and the PD and Adult Protective Services. Imagine, you know, the banks and the retailers and the tech companies were in your task force, and you could talk to them and say, hey, Microsoft, what do you guys know about this IP address? People get excited about just the idea of that. That's what we're doing. We're trying to put this living, breathing task force together where you could take real-time information and synergize it to the point where it works. And I think that's the real light at the end of the tunnel. I think that's the sky's the limit here in terms of we could actually do this better than the crooks. We're not doing it better than the crooks right now. When the losses go up by 30% a year every year, I mean, if you're a professional baseball player and your batting average goes down by 30% a year, you're looking for a new job. So you know, I think we definitely have to change the dynamic, but we do have the capacity for that. We have the capability. I think we just need the will right now.
And so with, you know, with the Elder Task Force that you created in San Diego, are private sector companies then key partners in that, or is it just a law enforcement group?
Right now, the EJTF in San Diego is led by the FBI, and the participants are essentially the law enforcement community in San Diego County. Okay. However, NEFCC, we call it NEFCC. NEFCC provides direct support to that task force.
I
So
see.
when they have cases that they would like to expand through the private industry, we take
Yeah,
those selectors and we enhance them.
got it. And are there other ones of these task forces in other FBI field offices, or is San Diego like the only one so far?
Unfortunately, this is it for right now. I think that point should be stated probably over and over and over again until it happens. I've said it in front of Congress a few times that I think that's the future. Just like ICACs or JTTFs or OCDF task forces, we need EJTFs in every major city in America. And I don't think you can overstate how important that mosaic idea is, that law enforcement has a little piece, right? The tech companies have a little piece, telcos have a little piece, financial industry, but you need somewhere where all those little pieces come together and show the mosaic of the actual fraud, to be able to wrap your brain around it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, as we get ready to wind down our conversation here, there's a little bit of a lightning round of questions that I wanted to ask you, Brady. So what's one signal that an elder fraud case can be a part of a larger organized crime operation?
There's a ton of them. I think a really important one is, and you should differentiate between elder fraud and elder abuse, right? Elder fraud traditionally involves strangers, right? The pop-up ads, phone calls, emails, notifications on your computer, those sorts of things. Whereas a lot of financial elder abuse is family members, caregivers, relatives, et cetera, et cetera. So when there's the injection of a stranger into your life, either through a tech support fraud or maybe a new love of your life, that would tend to lead back to a larger, more sophisticated criminal enterprise overseas. Got
it. What's one action you think companies should take to better protect older adults?
Again, this problem is so big that you have to have multiple legs to this particular stool. And I think, enforcement is a big part of it because you need deterrence, and deterrence is real. We need education, right? We need awareness. We need to keep talking about as much as possible. Just, say no to drugs, say no to fraud, whatever the case may be. For a lot of companies, the prophylactics and the things that they build technology-wise into their systems, incredibly important. And I think that's part of the future of stamping this out. One thing I think most, at least financial institutions and a lot of companies could do right now, is to really rely on their trusted contact program, and sell it. Like when you go back and look at the number of the clients in your company that participate in a trusted contact program, for most companies, I think it's relatively low. That's where we got a ton of our leads is, hey, I'm not a trusted contact, but when I got involved in my mom's finances, I realized, she sent $600,000 to this, this person in Ghana, whatever the case may be. So really kind of selling your trusted contact program, not as a way to take away somebody's financial freedoms, but to just offer that level of help, that when there's real urgency in a situation, or there's a crisis state, or there's dopamine, that somebody else not involved can look at that and say, Mom, Dad, that's not what you think it is.
And lastly, what's one policy or capability you think would be an accelerant against elder fraud?
Join NEFCC. I do. I think, there's something to be said for kind of a corporate herd immunity, right? The more companies that join NEFCC and share data, and again, just data related to bad guys, not customer data, not anything else, just bad guy fraudulent stuff. We can paint that picture broader and faster and better than we ever have been able to before. We haven't really done that as a country. So I think participation just by itself would open so many doors, even more than we can imagine right now. So fightelderfraud.org, join NEFCC and join the fight.
Yeah, no, that's great. And thank you so much, Brady, honestly, for what you've started post your FBI career, and for your leadership and for your insights today. I mean, elder fraud is not just a consumer protection issue, like you've mentioned. It is a public safety issue. It's an economic security and a national resilience challenge, really. And
Yeah.
without coordination, it seems like it's not going to work, right? Criminals will scale faster than defenders. And it really does seem like with this fight, we do need the partnerships, right? We need the shared intelligence with the private sector, and we need shared working across the law enforcement entities that exist in a city, and a focus in order to shift the balance to better protect the elderly population in our society. So thank you again for joining us for this conversation. And at ICIT, we do believe in protecting critical infrastructure. That's also a means of protecting people who depend on it, especially our most vulnerable. Thanks again
100%.
for everyone who joined today, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and advancing solutions together. And I wish you the best of luck as you continue to grow NEFCC. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.